Alex Foster stood at the panoramic window of his penthouse, gazing absent-mindedly at the bustling Manhattan below. In his 45 years, he had achieved everything he had dreamed of: a successful investment company, a billion-dollar fortune, influence in the highest circles. But something was missing. The ringing of the phone snapped him out of his reverie. "Mr. Foster, your car is ready," came the voice of his assistant, Sarah Chen. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll be down in a minute," Alex replied, adjusting his tie. Today was a special day. The opening of the new wing of the Children's Hospital, funded by the Foster Foundation. Charity had always held a special place in his heart, though he didn't like to talk about it. Walking down to the garage, Alex saw Sarah holding a file folder. "Good morning, boss. Here's the program for today's event and the speech you asked me to prepare," she said, holding out the papers. "Thank you, Sarah. You're flawless as always." Alex smiled, getting into the black Rolls-Royce. On the way to the hospital, Alex was going through the paperwork when his gaze caught on a strange line on the schedule. "Sarah, what is this item? Visiting Mr. Donovan. I don't remember us discussing that," he asked, frowning. Sarah looked a little embarrassed. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Foster. This is a personal request from the hospital board of directors. Mr. Donovan is a former employee of the orphanage who donated all his savings to build the new wing. They thought it would be a nice gesture if you thanked him personally." Alex hesitated. Usually he avoided unscheduled meetings, but this time something interested him. "Okay, let's put it on the program, but no more than 15 minutes, he agreed. The opening ceremony went smoothly. Alex gave an inspiring speech about the importance of supporting pediatric health care, cut the ribbon, and shook hands with all the important guests. But in the back of his mind he felt a strange uneasiness, as if something was about to happen. After the formal part was over, Sarah led him over to a modestly dressed older man standing apart from the crowd. "Mr. Foster, let me introduce you to Mr. Frank Donovan," she said. Frank Donovan turned out to be a short, thin man in his 70s. His face was mottled with wrinkles, but his eyes shone with kindness and wisdom. "Mr. Donovan, I wanted to personally thank you for your incredibly generous contribution to the construction of the new wing," Alex began, shaking the old man's hand. "You're welcome, Mr. Foster. I'm just doing what I think is right," Frank replied with a slight smile. "You know, I've worked with kids all my life and I wanted to leave something behind." Something in Frank's voice made Alex wary. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had heard that voice somewhere before. "You said you worked with children. In what capacity, if it's no secret?" Alex asked. "Oh, I was an educator at the Sunny Hope Orphanage for almost 40 years, only retired 5 years ago," replied Frank. Alex felt a chill run down his back. Sunny Hope was the name of the orphanage he had grown up in. "Mr. Donovan, do you mind if we continue our conversation in a more private setting?" Alex suggested, feeling that this meeting might be more important than he had realized. Frank looked a little surprised, but nodded. "Of course, Mr. Foster. As you wish." Alex turned to his assistant. "Sarah, cancel all my appointments for today. I have some urgent business to attend to." Sarah looked puzzled but nodded professionally. "Sure thing, boss. I'll take care of everything." Half an hour later, Alex and Frank were already sitting in the cozy living room of the old man's house. It was a modest dwelling in an old Brooklyn neighborhood, filled with books and photographs. "I apologize for the mess, Mr. Foster. I wasn't expecting visitors," Frank said, embarrassedly, clearing a space on the table. "That's all right, Mr. Donovan, and please, call me Alex," the millionaire replied, looking around. His gaze stopped on an old photograph on the mantelpiece. "Is that your family?" he asked, pointing to the picture. Frank walked over to the mantel and took the picture in his hands. "No, that's not really my family. Those are the kids from Sunny Hope that I worked with years ago." Alex stood up and moved closer to get a better look at the photo. And then his heart skipped a beat. In the photo, among a group of children, he saw himself, a little boy about 7 years old with unruly blonde hair and a serious look. That's me, Alex whispered, not believing his eyes. Frank stared at him intently and then at the photograph. My God, he said quietly. Alex? Little Alex Foster? Alex felt the room begin to spin. He sank into the nearest chair, never taking his eyes off the photograph. I don't understand, he began. How did this picture end up in your possession? And why don't I remember you, Mr. Donovan? Frank sat down across from Alex, still holding the photograph in his hands. Oh, Alex, it's a long story. I'm not sure you're ready to hear it. Please, Mr. Donovan, I need to know, Alex insisted. Frank took a deep breath. Okay, but before I begin, you need to know that everything I've done has been for your own good. Alex tensed, but nodded, preparing to hear a story that could change everything he knew about his past. You came to Sunny Hope when you were only 3 years old, Frank began. Your parents died in a car accident and you had no other relatives. I remember the first time you crossed the threshold of our house. Such a small, scared little boy. Alex listened, holding his breath. He remembered almost nothing about his early childhood. You were a special child, Alex. Smart beyond your years, inquisitive. I always knew you had a great future, Frank continued with warmth in his voice. But why don't I remember you? And how did I end up in foster care? Alex asked. Frank lowered his eyes. Here's where the hard part of the story begins. When you were 7 years old, a couple came to our house, John and Mary Foster. They wanted to adopt a child and their attention was immediately drawn to you. Alex nodded. He vaguely remembered his adoptive parents, but they had died when he was 16. The Fosters were good people, but they had their own problems. John suffered from alcoholism and Mary had health problems. Officially, they shouldn't have been approved for adoption, Frank spoke softly, as if ashamed of his words. What do you mean? Alex felt anxiety overwhelm him. I forged documents, Alex, changed medical reports, withheld information about John's drinking problems. I knew it was illegal, but I saw the way they looked at you. The way you looked at them, I thought I was doing the right thing. Alex jumped up from his chair. You what? You put me in a family with an alcoholic. How could you do that? Frank held up his hands, trying to calm Alex down. Please hear me out to the end. I know I made a mistake, but I also knew you had a chance for a better life with them. The Fosters had connections, money. They could have given you an education, opportunities you would never have gotten at the orphanage. Alex started pacing the room, trying to comprehend what he had heard. But why don't I remember you? Why do I remember almost nothing about the orphanage? Frank sighed heavily. After you were adopted, I kept watching you. And when you were about 10 years old, I learned that the situation in the Foster household had deteriorated. John started drinking harder. There were incidents of violence. Alex stopped, feeling a lump come up to his throat. Vague, painful memories began to surface in his mind. I couldn't let that happen. I felt responsible for you. So I stepped in again. I contacted social services, but not directly. I reported the situation anonymously to the Foster family. What happened next? Alex asked, though he already guessed the answer. You were taken away from the family for a while. You went through a series of psychological counseling sessions. The doctors diagnosed you with PTSD and used experimental therapy to help you cope with the trauma. A side effect was a partial loss of memory of your early childhood. Alex felt tears streaming down his cheeks. He could never explain the gaps in his memory, the strange feeling of alienation that sometimes encompassed him. But then you were brought back to the Fosters. John was treated for alcoholism and social services decided the family deserved a second chance. And to be honest, this time it was different. John really changed, became a better father, and Mary always adored you. Alex slowly sank back into his chair. Why are you telling me all this now, after all these years? Frank stood up and walked over to an old secretary in the corner of the room. He opened one of the drawers and pulled out a thick folder. Because I have to make it up to you. Frank slowly walked over to Alex, holding the battered folder in his hands. His hands trembled slightly as he held it out to the millionaire. It's all here, Alex. Every detail of your childhood, every decision I made, and every mistake I've made. Alex took the folder carefully, feeling the weight of the past literally pressing down on his hands. He opened it and saw dozens of documents, photos, and notes, neatly arranged by dates. I don't know if I'm ready for this, Alex whispered, looking at the first page, a birth certificate with the names of his real parents. Frank sank heavily into the chair across from him. I understand, but I think you deserve to know the truth, the whole truth. Alex began to slowly look through the documents, and with each page his face grew more and more tense. Pictures of a happy family, his real parents holding him in their arms, reports of the tragic accident that took their lives, documents of his admission to the orphanage. My parents, were they good people? Alex asked, not taking his eyes off the picture of the smiling couple. Frank nodded, his eyes filling with tears. The best ones I've ever known. Your father was a teacher and your mother was a nurse. They loved you so much, Alex. You were the center of their world. Alex felt his heart squeeze. All his life he had felt an emptiness he couldn't explain. Now he was beginning to understand its source. Tell me about them, please, he asked, feeling small and vulnerable for the first time in a long time. Frank took a deep breath and began to tell him. Your father, James, was the most patient man I've ever met. He taught middle school and had an amazing gift for finding an approach to troubled teens. And your mother, Elizabeth, was a real angel at the hospital. The patients adored her for her kindness and caring. Alex listened with bated breath, trying to visualize these people he never knew, but who were a part of him. They met in college, Frank continued, and it was love at first sight. When you were born, they were over the moon. James always said you had Elizabeth's eyes, just as bright and curious. Alex involuntarily reached for his face, as if trying to feel that connection to his parents. And then there was that damn accident, Frank's voice shook. It was just an ordinary evening. They were coming home after dinner at a friend's house. A drunk driver drove into the oncoming lane. They didn't stand a chance. Alex felt tears streaming down his cheeks. He didn't remember his parents, but the pain of losing them suddenly became so sharp, so real. What about me? Was I with them? He asked in a hoarse voice. Frank shook his head. No, you were with the babysitter. That saved your life, Alex. There was a long pause. Alex tried to comprehend all the information that had come crashing down on him. His gaze fell on the adoption papers, and he remembered the Fosters. What about John and Mary? You said you forged the papers so they could adopt me. Why? Why did you take that risk? Frank looked exhausted, but he knew he had to answer all of Alex's questions. I watched you every day at the orphanage, Alex. You were a special kid, smart, kind, but so lonely. When the Fosters came to visit, I saw you truly smile for the first time in a long time. Alex frowned. But you knew about John's drinking problem. How could you risk my safety? Frank lowered his eyes. I hoped that love and responsibility would change him, and to some extent it did, though not immediately. Mary was a beautiful woman, and I could see how much she wanted to be a mother. I believed that together they could create a real family for you. Alex stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where children were playing. His thoughts were in chaos. But it didn't go the way you planned, did it? He asked without turning around. Frank sighed heavily. No, it didn't. The first few years were good. John hung in there, Mary surrounded you with love. But then John lost his job and everything went downhill. He started drinking harder, became violent. Alex turned sharply. He used to hit me. Mary, Frank shook his head. No, it didn't come to physical violence, but emotional. You witnessed their fights often, heard the yelling, the threats. It left its mark. Alex nodded slowly. A lot of things were becoming clear now. His fear of conflict, his difficulty in building close relationships. And then you decided to intervene again. It wasn't a question, but a statement. Yes, Frank admitted. I couldn't stand by and watch your life fall apart. I anonymously reported you to social services. You were taken away while an investigation was conducted. Alex walked back to the chair and sat down, feeling devastated. And then there was that. Therapy? The one that erased my memories? Frank nodded. It was a new treatment for PTSD in children. It was supposed to help you cope with the trauma, keep it from affecting your future. But the side effect was partial amnesia. You destroyed my past, Alex said quietly. Frank flinched at those words. Yeah, I thought I was doing the right thing. I wanted to protect you, to give you a chance at a happy future without the weight of heavy memories. Alex looked up at Frank, and in his eyes he read a mixture of anger and pain. You had no right to make that decision for me. You robbed me of a part of my life, my identity. Frank lowered his head. You're right. I didn't have the right, and I live with that guilt every day. There was a long pause. Alex went through the papers in the folder, trying to piece together the pieces of his past. What happened then? After therapy? He asked finally. Frank perked up a little. It was like a miracle. John, after learning that he could lose you forever, finally got his head on straight. He got serious treatment for alcoholism, started going to family therapy with Mary. When they got you back to them, they were completely different people. Alex nodded. That part he remembered, the loving family, the support he'd gotten from the Fosters as a teenager. But why did you keep following me all these years? Why kept all those documents? Alex asked, pointing to the folder. Frank smiled sadly. Because I felt responsible for you, Alex. I knew that one day you might start asking questions about your past, and I wanted to be ready to answer them. Besides, you were like the son I never had. Those words silenced Alex. He stared at the old man in front of him, a man who had made many mistakes but always acted with the best of intentions. I don't know if I could ever forgive you for what you did, Alex said honestly. Frank nodded. I understand, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know the truth. Alex stood up, feeling the need to be alone and make sense of everything he'd learned. I need time, Mr. Donovan. I'll get back to you. Frank stood up as well. Of course, Alex. I'll be here if you need me. When Alex was already at the door, Frank called out to him. Alex, there's something else you should know. Alex turned around, looking questioningly at the old man. Your parents, they left you an inheritance, a small trust fund. I never told you about it because I was afraid it would lead to questions about your past. But now you need to know. Alex felt a lump come up to his throat. Where is that money now? Frank walked over to the secretary and pulled out another envelope. Here are all the details. I invested this money on your behalf. They've grown considerably over the years. Alex took the envelope with trembling hands. Thank you, was all he could say before leaving the apartment. Once outside, Alex took a deep breath, trying to deal with the storm of emotions inside. His life, which he thought was entirely his own merit, was suddenly the result of other people's decisions and actions. He felt anger, resentment, but also a strange relief that he had finally learned the truth. Alex pulled out his cell phone and dialed a number. Sarah, it's me. Cancel all my appointments for the next week. I need time to take care of some personal business. Sure thing, boss. Is everything okay? You could hear the concern in Sarah's voice. Alex thought for a moment. No, Not really, but hopefully it will be. And Sarah, thank you for everything." He hung up the phone and walked slowly down the street, not knowing where he was going, but feeling like he was starting a new phase of his life. Days turned into weeks. Alex immersed himself in studying the documents Frank had given him. He sat in his office for hours, rereading old letters, looking at photographs, trying to recover lost memories. One evening, the doorbell of his penthouse suite rang. Alex, surprised by the uninvited guest, opened the door and saw Sarah. "Boss, sorry for the intrusion, but I was worried." Alex looked at Sarah standing in the doorway of his penthouse and felt strangely relieved by her presence. "Sarah, come on in." He stepped aside, letting her inside. Sarah stepped in, looking around. The usually spotlessly clean apartment was now cluttered with papers, photos, and old documents. "Boss, what's going on here? You've missed some important meetings, you're not answering your phone, the board is getting worried." You could hear the genuine concern in her voice. Alex sighed heavily and sank down on the couch. "Have a seat, Sarah. I need to tell you something." Sarah cautiously sat down next to him, looking at her boss carefully. In her years of working, she had never seen him so confused and vulnerable. Alex began his story. He talked about his meeting with Frank Donovan, about the shocking revelations about his past, about the feelings of loss and anger he had been experiencing in recent weeks. Sarah listened without interrupting, her eyes widening as the story unfolded. "Oh my God, Alex," she finally uttered, forgetting the formalities. "I had no idea." Alex smiled sadly. "I had no idea myself, Sarah, my whole life. It's turned out to be built on lies and manipulation." Sarah gently placed a hand on Alex's shoulder. "But that doesn't undo everything you've accomplished. You've built a successful business, helped so many people through your charity." "But who am I really, Sarah?" Alex interrupted her. "I always thought I knew myself, my roots. And now I'm not sure of anything." There was a long pause. Sarah pondered her next words. "You know, boss, Alex," she began cautiously, "maybe this is a chance to get to know yourself again. Not through the lens of what others have told you, but through your own experiences and feelings." Alex raised a surprised look at her. "What do you mean?" Sarah stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the New York City night skyline. "I think you're stuck in the past, trying to figure out who you were, but maybe it's more important to figure out who you are now and who you want to be." Her words made Alex think. He stood up and joined Sarah at the window. "You're right, Sarah. I've gotten so caught up in the past that I've forgotten about the present and the future." He turned to her. "Thank you. You're not just a great assistant, you're a true friend." Sarah smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "I'm glad I could help, Alex." That moment was a turning point in Alex's life. He woke up the next morning with renewed determination. He called Frank Donovan and made an appointment. A few hours later, Alex was once again sitting in Frank's modest living room. This time, the atmosphere was less tense but still awkward. "I'm glad you came, Alex," Frank began, nervously rubbing the edge of his sweater. Alex nodded. "I've been thinking for a long time, Mr. Donovan, about what you told me, about your life, about the future." Frank listened intently, afraid to interrupt. "I can't say I've forgiven you," Alex continued. "What you did changed my whole life. But I'm beginning to understand why you did it." Frank took a deep breath. "Alex, I know I hurt you. If I could go back—" "But we can't go back, Mr. Donovan," Alex interrupted him. "We can only move forward, and I want to move forward. But to do that, I need your help." Frank straightened in his chair. "Anything you need, Alex. I'll do what I can." Alex pulled an envelope out of his pocket, the same one Frank had given him last time. "I've been looking into the information on the trust fund my parents left me. It's a huge amount of money, Mr. Donovan." Frank nodded. "Yes, The investment has been very successful. I've tried to manage the fund as efficiently as possible. And you've succeeded, Alex said. But it's not just about the money. I found a letter from my parents that they left with the trust documents. Frank raised his eyebrows in surprise. A letter? I didn't know about it. Alex pulled a folded piece of paper from the envelope. It was sealed and addressed to me. I only read it yesterday. He unfolded the letter and began to read aloud. Dear Alex, if you are reading this letter, it means we are no longer with you. We hope it won't happen for many years, but life is unpredictable and we want to be prepared for anything. Above all, we want you to know we love you more than anything in the world. You are our greatest treasure, our pride and joy. Every day with you has been a true gift. We set up this trust fund to secure your future. But money is not the main thing we want to leave you. We hope you inherit our love for people, our passion for justice, and our desire to make this world a better place. Use these funds wisely, Alex, not just to accumulate wealth, but to do good, help those in need, support education and science, fight for those who don't have a voice. We don't know what kind of person you'll be when you grow up, but we believe you will be kind, honest, and brave. We believe you will make the right choices. Remember that we are always with you, even if you can't see us. We love you, Alex, and we always will. Mom and Dad. When Alex finished reading, there was silence in the room. Frank sat with his head down, tears streaming down his cheeks. Yeah, I didn't know, he whispered. If I had known about this letter? Alex folded the letter and carefully tucked it back into the envelope. Mr. Donovan, I've thought a lot about what to do next, and I've made a decision. Frank looked up at him, full of hope and fear. I want to use this money the way my parents wanted. I want to start a charity that will help underprivileged children, orphans, those in difficult situations. Frank began to nod, his face brightening. That's a great idea, Alex. Your parents would be proud of you. But I need help, Alex continued. Your help, Mr. Donovan. You know the system inside out. You know where help is really needed. I want you to be an advisor to this foundation. Frank looked stunned. Yeah? But Alex, after everything I've done, Alex raised his hand, stopping him. You've made mistakes, Mr. Donovan, but you've also dedicated your life to caring for children. Your experience is invaluable. I think this is a chance for both of us to redeem the past and do something really important. Frank was silent for a few seconds, then nodded slowly. Yeah, I'll be honored to help, Alex. Thank you for this chance. Alex held out his hand and Frank shook it, sealing their new agreement. Over the next few months, Alex's life changed completely. He still ran his investment company, but now devoted most of his time to his new charitable foundation. The New Hope Foundation, named after the orphanage where Alex grew up, quickly became one of the most effective charities in the country. They not only provided financial assistance, but also developed innovative programs to support children and families in crisis. Alex often worked late into the night discussing new projects with Frank and Sarah, who became the foundation's executive director. Their relationship gradually grew from just a working relationship to a true friendship. One evening, as the three of them sat in the foundation's office discussing a new program to support foster families, Alex suddenly stopped talking and looked at his colleagues. You know, he began thoughtfully, I've spent my whole life believing that my success is solely to my credit, that I had made myself. But now I realize that behind every successful person is a whole network of people who helped, supported, guided. Frank and Sarah listened intently. My real parents gave me life and left me an inheritance that allowed me to create this foundation. The Fosters, despite all their problems, gave me a family and support through the difficult years. You, Mr. Donovan, he turned to Frank, though you've made mistakes, you've always tried to protect me and give me a chance at a better life. Frank nodded, his eyes glistening with tears. And you, Sarah? Alex smiled at his assistant and friend. You've always been there for me, supporting me even when I didn't realize I needed help myself. Sarah smiled back embarrassedly. I think true success isn't just about personal accomplishments. It's the ability to use your resources and capabilities to help others, to create that very support network for those who need it. Alex stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city at night. We can't change the past, but we can change the future, for ourselves and for the children we help. And I'm grateful to fate that I have that opportunity, and for having both of you by my side on this journey. Frank and Sarah stood up as well and joined Alex at the window. The three of them looked out at the lights of the city, feeling like they were part of something bigger than themselves. It had been 5 years since that evening when Alex, Frank, and Sarah had stood at the window of the New Hope Foundation office, looking out at the lights of the city at night. A lot has changed in that time, but much has stayed the same. The New Hope Foundation has become one of the most influential charitable organizations in the country. Their programs to help disadvantaged children and support foster parents have become role models. Thousands of children have been given a chance at a better life because of their work. Alex was sitting at his desk in the foundation's main office, reviewing the latest reports when there was a knock on the door. "Come in," he said, without taking his eyes off the papers. Sarah entered the office, as elegant and collected as ever. Over the years, she had gone from being just an assistant to a true partner and friend. "Alex, we have a problem with a new project in Chicago," she began without preamble. Alex looked up, a look of concern in his gaze. "What's wrong?" Sarah sat down in the chair across from his desk. "The local authorities are blocking the opening of our new support center. They say we don't have the necessary permits." Alex frowned. "But we checked everything. We had all the paperwork." "Yeah, but it looks like someone at City Hall is deliberately putting obstacles in our way." Sarah looked frustrated. Alex leaned back in his chair, thinking. "Have you talked to Frank about this?" "Yes, he's now trying to use his old connections to find out what's up," Sarah replied. At that moment, Frank entered the office without knocking. Although he was well into his 70s, he remained energetic and enthusiastic. "I have some news," he began without preamble, "and they're not good." Alex and Sarah turned to him, waiting for him to continue. Frank sighed heavily. "It looks like James Harris is behind the blocking of our project." Alex tensed. James Harris was his longtime business rival who had recently become heavily involved in politics. "But what does Harris have to do with our project in Chicago?" Sarah asked. Frank sat down next to her. "According to my sources, Harris is planning to run for mayor of Chicago, and he sees our foundation as a threat to his reputation." Alex stood up and walked over to the window. "I don't get it. We're helping kids. How can that be a threat to his reputation?" Frank and Sarah looked over at each other. "Alex," Sarah began softly, "you may not notice, but you've become a very influential figure in recent years. People listen to your opinion, respect you. Harris probably sees you as a potential political rival." Alex turned toward them, a look of surprise on his face. "But I've never sought a political career. I just want to help people." "Sometimes that's enough to become a threat to those who lust for power," Frank remarked. Alex returned to the table and took a deep breath. "Well, let's think about how we can solve this problem. Does anyone have any ideas?" Sarah straightened up in her chair. "I think we need to act on several fronts. First, the legal route. We need to appeal the authorities' decision, show that all our paperwork is in order." Frank nodded. "Agreed. I can contact our lawyers and get the process started." "Secondly," Sarah continued, "we need to bring this situation to the public's attention. Show how many kids we can help if we're allowed to open the center." "Good idea," Alex said. "We can organize a press conference, invite journalists, show them our plans." "And third," Frank added, We need to find allies in Chicago, local community organizations, teachers, doctors, anyone who can attest to the need for our center. Alex nodded. Great. Let's divide up the tasks and get to work. The following weeks were filled with hard work. Alex, Sarah, and Frank practically lived in the office, coordinating efforts to overcome obstacles. They organized a massive PR campaign, touting the importance of their work. Alex gave several interviews talking about his background and why it was so important to support disadvantaged children. One evening, as the three of them sat in the office discussing the latest news, Alex suddenly stopped talking and looked at his co-workers. "You know," he began thoughtfully, "I never thought we would face such obstacles. When we started, I naively assumed that everyone would only be happy to have our help." Sarah smiled softly. "The world isn't always fair, Alex, but that's why our work is so important." Frank nodded. "I've seen a lot of injustice in my lifetime, but I've also seen how small acts of kindness can change someone's life." Alex stood up and started walking around the office. "You know, I often think about my parents, about the ones I never knew. I wonder if they'd be proud of me now." Sarah stood up and walked over to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Alex, I'm sure they would be incredibly proud. You're not just fulfilling their last will and testament, you've exceeded expectations." Frank stood up as well. "Sarah's right. You've taken the legacy they left and turned it into something much bigger. You're changing the lives of thousands of children." Alex felt a lump come up to his throat. "Thank you both. I couldn't have done it without you." At that moment, the phone rang. Sarah walked over and answered it. After a minute, she turned to Alex and Frank, her face brightening. "That was from the Chicago mayor's office. They've reversed their decision. We can open the center." The room filled with cheers of joy. Alex hugged Sarah and then Frank. "We did it," he exclaimed. "We really did it." But their joy was short-lived. The next morning, Alex woke up to a call from Sarah. "Alex, turn on the news. Now." You could hear the tension in her voice. Alex turned on the TV and saw the face of James Harris. He was giving a press conference. "And that is why I feel it is necessary to conduct a full investigation of the New Hope Foundation. We have information about possible financial irregularities and abuses." Alex felt the ground go from under his feet. He knew that all the accusations were false, but he also realized the damage they could do to the foundation's reputation. Over the next few days, the foundation's office turned into a veritable defense headquarters. Lawyers, PR specialists, financial experts, everyone worked around the clock to repel Harris's attack. Alex hardly slept at all, giving interviews, meeting with partners, reassuring employees. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. One evening, as he sat in his office reviewing another report, there was a knock on the door. "Come in," he said in a tired voice. Sarah entered the office. She looked exhausted, but there was a fire of determination burning in her eyes. "Alex, I have an idea," she began without preamble. Alex looked up at her. "I'm listening." Sarah sat down across from him. "We've been on the defensive all this time, answering accusations, making excuses. But what if we go on the offensive?" Alex frowned. "What do you mean?" "Let's hold an open house. Let's invite journalists, public figures, ordinary people. Let's show them our work from the inside. Let them see the children we've helped, the families we've supported." Alex hesitated. "It's risky. We'll be as exposed as we are." "Exactly," Sarah nodded. "But we have nothing to hide. Let everyone see the truth." At that moment, Frank entered the office. "I heard your conversation, and I fully support Sarah's idea." Alex looked at his friends and co-workers. He saw the confidence and support in their eyes. "Good," he said finally. "Let's do it." Preparations for the open house took 2 weeks. They invited journalists from all the major publications, community leaders, politicians. But most importantly, they invited the families and children the foundation had helped. On the day of the event, the foundation's office and centers were packed. Alex, Sarah, and Frank led tours, answered questions, and introduced the guests to the work of the foundation. But the most powerful moment was a speech by 17-year-old Emily, who grew up in foster care with the foundation's support. "I don't know what I would have become without the help of New Hope," she said, standing in front of the cameras. "They didn't just give me a roof over my head. They gave me hope, a belief in myself. Now I'm getting ready to go to college. I have a future, and I know there are thousands like me." After her speech, there was silence in the hall, followed by applause. That evening, when the last guests had left, Alex, Sarah, and Frank sat in the study, exhausted but happy. "We did it," Alex said, leaning back in his chair. Sarah smiled. "Yes, we did it, but it's just the beginning." Frank nodded. "Now the whole world has seen our work. We can't stop." Alex looked at his friends. "You're right. We've only just begun. I have an idea." He stood up and walked over to a large map of the United States hanging on the wall. "We started with one center. Now we have offices in 10 states. But that's not enough. I want us to have centers in every state in 5 years." 5 years flew by like a day. Alex's ambitious plan to expand New Hope Foundation to every state in the U.S. has been successful, though not without challenges. On the opening day of the last center in Alaska, Alex stood in front of the mirror in his hotel room, adjusting his tie. He noticed that there was more gray in his dark hair and wrinkles around his eyes. The years had been filled with hard work, but every wrinkle was worth it. That evening, the three of them sat in a cozy restaurant celebrating their accomplishment. "So, what's next?" Sarah asked, raising her glass. Alex hesitated for a moment. "You know, I've been thinking about this a lot. We've accomplished something I never even dreamed of 5 years ago, but there are so many more kids who need help, not just in the U.S., but all over the world." Frank and Sarah listened intently. "I want to make New Hope an international organization. Start with a few countries and then, who knows?" Sarah smiled. "That sounds like a challenge. I'm in." Frank shook his head, but there was a glow of pride in his eyes. "You two are incorrigible, but I know you can handle it." Alex raised his glass. "Here's to New Hope, to the children we've helped and will help again, and to us, our small but very special family." They clinked glasses, and in that moment Alex realized that he had finally found his place in life. He remembered his parents' letter, their hope that he would make the world a better place. He hoped that somewhere out there they were proud of him. So ended the story of a boy from an orphanage who became a millionaire and then found his true calling in helping others.